and challenging our imaginations. Everybody? We give thanks this day for this fragile planet Earth, its times and tides, its sunsets and seasons. We give thanks this day for the joy of human life, its wonders and surprises, its hopes and achievements. We give thanks this day for our human community, our common past and future hope, our oneness transcending all separation, our capacity to work for peace and justice in the midst of hostility and oppression. We give thanks this day for high hopes and noble causes, for faith without fanaticism, for understanding of views not shared. We give thanks this day for all who have labored and suffered for a fairer world, who have lived so that others might live in dignity and freedom. We give thanks this day for human liberty and sacred rights, for opportunities to change and grow, to affirm and choose. We give thanks this day. We pray that we may live not by our fears, but by our hopes, not by our words, but by our deeds. Reading one of the UUA principles has been a good addition to our morning's order of service. Don't you think so? Today, I chose the fifth principle as it speaks to the democratic process within our congregation and our national organization, the Unitarian Universalist Association. Where did the principles come from? When were they established? They were adopted at the 1985 UUA General Assembly, the last year that Eugene Pickett was the president. That was the same year, by the way, that this hymn book, Singing the Living Tradition, was adopted. These are significant accomplishments of his tenure, but he would be the first to say that he didn't do it alone. He always recognized and gave credit to the staff and family that supported him. So what was the UU Association like in 1979 when he began his service? In the previous 10 years, adult membership had declined by 35,000, and RE participation had been reduced by 65,000. Needless to say, the coffers were diminishing as well. Gene Pickett described the mood as being pessimistic, distrustful, and discouraged. Ugh. There was divisiveness over Black empowerment, gay and lesbian concerns, feminism, need more. Who would want to be elected to that job? He clearly did. He sought the position, an individual with unshakable commitment to the tribe, to Unitarian Universalism. He was unique at the time to UU leadership. The old New England guard had preceded him. As he wrote, in contrast, I was not born a Unitarian or a Universalist. Indeed, I had never heard of the words until I was in college. There had never been a minister in my family. I came from a relatively undistinguished family living in rural Maryland. My mother was a member of the state Republican committee. And I had a perfect record of attendance at a Methodist Sunday school for 10 years, unquote. By old UU standards, he was an outsider, but he had a record of practical achievement. He was an administrative force rather than a prophetic presence. He is described as a great listener, a genuine human being, a person possessing moral backbone and mental steeliness. Gene Pickett was also known for being a workaholic. So how did he address the financial deficit? He immediately initiated the Friends of the UU campaign and for the first time used the UU World mailing list to appeal to everyone for financial support. He used his good working relationship with the North Shore UU Society and in his first year established a $20 million endowment for the association. Jerry and I were from Long Island and very familiar with the VEACH program there, so you can ask Jerry Coffee about that one. Well, that took him off the hot seat for the money problem. But now, what about the divisiveness I mentioned earlier? He fully embraced pluralism. Tom Owen Toll, his biographer, stated that one of the hallmark features of Gene's presidency was his unflinching commitment to theological pluralism. At his first General Assembly, Pickett stated, quote, "Let us provide an atmosphere in which those among us of all theological persuasions, the Christians, the humanists, the existentialists, may fully explore and boldly express their worldview without defensiveness, belligerence, or dogmatism. For too long, pluralism as a value has received our lip service. Now let pluralism become at last a real source of vitality and strength. Ours will never be one word, but many. Let them be spoken with confidence and vigor. By rights, ours ought to be the richest theological milieu of any denomination in modern experience," unquote. And from this came our principles and purposes, and the hymn book with gender-neutral wording, which we all appreciated, and a broader range of musical selections. There were considerable other programs and initiatives of his presidency, but the hymn book and the principles are here with us today as clear reminders. So, how did this Methodist boy arrive at the UU Church? We all have our stories. What is his? I think Owen is probably our only born UU here. Anybody else? Ah, okay, that's right. Yes, okay, very good. Gene entered American University in Washington, D.C. at the age of 16. In his second year of college, he enlisted in the Navy as he was soon to be caught up in the World War II draft, and he joined the Navy. Despite the initial trauma of military training, he matured during his service and served in the South Pacific, where he engaged with colleagues in most serious discussions. He began to question his Methodist faith. When he returned to college, rather than living in a dorm, he rented a room. And unbeknownst to him, his landlady just happened to be a member of All Souls Unitarian Church. Attending a lecture by a Progressive Party vice presidential candidate was Pickett's first experience at the Unitarian Church, and later he began visiting the All Souls on Sunday mornings to hear the sermons of A. Powell Davies. Now, if you were here last Sunday, Reverend Don shared a reading from A. Powell Davies, and I also have given a sermon on him in the past. Anyway, Pickett stated, quote, "Here was a faith which combined the passion of my early Orthodox upbringing with the sensibilities of my new discoveries. What I found in Washington was a holistic religion, a faith for the whole person," unquote. So after college, Gene decided to go to Meadville Lombard Theological School in Chicago. He wanted to, quote, "get myself sorted out," unquote. And he wanted to do some good, to make the world a better place. But after a year in seminary, he was experiencing enormous uncertainty and about his identity and where he was headed. He was miserable to the point of suicidal. Utterly desolated, he sought counseling. He even took an evening job to pay for his therapy. Quote, "I was trying to cope with the most basic question. Why am I here? What is the meaning of life? And most particularly, what is the meaning of my life? My own search for meaning was a major struggle throughout my ministry. Perhaps it was the most basic of struggles. For unless we come to terms with this question in our own lives, it is difficult to be much help to others in their search for meaning," unquote. His struggle with depression was real. His insecurities would follow him, of course, throughout his life's work. In Pickett's biography entitled Born on a Wintry Wind, he is frequently described as having a wintry personality, and Pickett himself often emphasized the theme of hope through arduous struggle. In a 1983 at the UU General Assembly, Pickett stated, quote, "I know, I feel within the very depths of my being that there is a fountainhead, an animating source, a wellspring that nurtures and renews, reveals and affirms. I have pondered that such experiences are most intense at times of loneliness, rejection, pain, and uncertainty, at times when bleakness grips my soul, unquote. Depression, as I said, was real to him. He acknowledged it, he sought help when he needed it, and he found hope and purpose. He is an example for us today. Mental health concerns have deeply affected my family and perhaps yours as well. So Eugene graduated from seminary quite definite that being a religious professional was his lifelong summons, and he headed south. Only 4 Southern Unitarian churches had survived the Civil War, and there were only 9 in the late 40s. Our church here was started in the 50s. So in 1952, Gene was called to the Miami church, in 1954 to Richmond, Virginia, and in 1962 to the Atlanta UU church. In Miami, when he arrived, African Americans were not allowed on the streets of Miami Beach after sundown without a work permit. Multiracial gatherings were illegal. And the Unitarian Church in Miami was one of 2 places that would risk holding integrated meetings. So that was a pretty brave congregation. The Picketts were in Richmond in 1954, the year of the famous Brown v. Board of Education ruling. His church was staunchly liberal on race relation issues, maintaining a high profile on integration. In 1965, Gene marched in Selma, and MLK Jr. occasionally preached in the Atlanta UU Church. Reverend Don again mentioned in his MLK Jr. sermon how Dr. King frequented UU churches, and he certainly was comfortable in the Atlanta pulpit. Pickett's unbending commitment to racial justice took root during his military experience, where he was deeply disturbed about segregation. Reverend Pickett was also known to preach consistently against the Vietnam War, and the church provided a center for conscientious objectors. Years before Roe v. Wade, Gene was a member of the Planned Parenthood Board. So as we have in our congregations today, there were social justice issues of concern throughout his ministry. He always cautioned, however, that there was a great deal more to liberal religious institutions than social actions. A great deal more to liberal religious institutions than social action. Ministry to him was the craft of community building and justice making. Pickett stated that we must speak to the quality of our religious experience, the meaning of existence. So let's talk theology for a moment. As mentioned earlier, Pickett entered Meadville-Lombard Seminary with significant and basic questions about the meaning of life. He considered himself a rational humanist, and we have wonderful humanists in our church as well. He considered human needs and values were more important than religious beliefs. Quote, "Whether or not God cares, I care. Whether or not the universe exudes meaning, we humans must," unquote. If he was to be saved, it would be by the way of good works and not by grace. In seminary, this was not a popular theology. It didn't go well with his peers or with the faculty there. But he continued his search for spiritual nurture throughout his ministry, and it took him in many directions. His biographer, Owen Told, shared that Pickett's entrenched humanism mellowed and evolved into a mystical naturalism. Quote, "He grew to proclaim that there was a profound sense of connectedness discoverable in the human and natural realm, a relatedness that cannot be fully fathomed and remains forever inspirational," unquote. A resolute sense of interrelatedness became the foundation of his theology. What I found most fascinating, however, was Gene's closing to what is referred to his Berry Street address at the UU General Assembly in 1987. A means for salvation, he admitted, was part of his life search. He was convinced that he would be saved by way of good works. Now, years past his seminary days, he found it ironic that he may yet be saved by grace. I personally struggle with the meaning of grace, this unmerited divine assistance given to us, this amazing grace that we sing with such emotion. Pickett identified with the theologian Paul Tillich's description of grace. Tillich said, quote, "Sometimes a wave of light breaks into our darkness, and it is as though a voice were saying, 'You are accepted by that which is greater than you, and the name of which you do not know.' If that happens to us, we experience grace," unquote. Now, Pickett concluded his major address saying, "Now it occurs to me that if salvation comes, it will probably be as a small wave of light, that small wave of light born into my darkness on a wintry wind," unquote. This exceptional man, through his personal darkness and his search for the meaning of life, found the ministry and an inspirational connectedness in the human and the natural world. Through ministry, his life's work persisted in community and meaningful social action. And through his ministry, he was led to and sought greater leadership as the president of the UUA. I believe that this has meaning for me today, and perhaps for all of us, to grow and search individually and in community, and then turn that insight into action. Our current UUA president, Reverend Susan Frederick Ray, wrote in last summer's UU World, quote, "To be a Unitarian Universalist in the context of a pained and unjust world is to be moved by love. May our faith, our worship, and our nurturing community offer us deeper spiritual practices that sustain us," unquote. I think Eugene Pickett would agree with her. We are all on life's journeys through this beautiful, inspiring natural world and in the loving company of this, our nurturing community. So please let's close by singing together hymn number 1064, Blue Boat Home.